Have you ever paused and realized that almost everything you do is for someone else, your family, your friends, society, while your own voice quietly whispers unheard? This book is for that voice inside you, for the moments you've ignored yourself, and for the courage you've been waiting to find. Dive in and discover the freedom that comes when you stop living for others and start living for yourself. If you're ready to finally embrace your own path, hit that subscribe button and journey with me, because your life, your happiness, and your freedom are waiting. Chapter 1. The chains you never saw. I didn't realize I was living someone else's life until one quiet evening when the world outside my window seemed louder than my own thoughts. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the city below creeping through the thin walls of my apartment. The weight of unspoken expectations pressed down on me like an invisible hand, and for the first time, I felt the full gravity of it. How had I allowed myself to become a shadow of what other people wanted me to be? All my life, I had been chasing approval. From my parents, nods of satisfaction, to my friends, silent judgments. From social media likes to professional accolades, I measured myself by the reflection I saw in other people's eyes. Every choice, every decision, every small step I took felt like it had been pre-approved, pre-written, pre-decided by someone else. I thought I was living my life, but the truth was uglier. I was merely living the life expected of me. I remember the moment clearly. I had spent the entire afternoon helping a colleague finish a project that wasn't mine, saying yes to favors that drained me, smiling through conversations that left me hollow. And when the day finally ended, I sat alone, exhausted, and realized I had no memory of doing anything that truly mattered to me. The thought hit me like ice. When was the last time I made a choice for myself? It's strange the way life deceives you. You don't notice the chains when you're wearing them. They aren't heavy, they aren't loud, they're subtle. A comment here, a suggestion there, a polite demand, a small expectation. Each one a link in a chain you don't even realize exists. And then one day you look around and see your hands bound, your feet tied, and your heart whispering a truth you've been avoiding for years. You aren't free. I had always prided myself on being helpful, responsible, and reliable. On paper, these were virtues, but in reality, they were armor. I wore them to keep myself safe from criticism, from conflict, from the frightening possibility of being truly alone. I believed that as long as I was meeting everyone else's needs, I would be loved, respected, and accepted. But that love, respect, and acceptance were never mine, they were borrowed. And borrowing something as vital as your own happiness comes with a cost, the slow erosion of your soul. I tried to ignore the feeling at first. I convinced myself that this discomfort, this restlessness was temporary, that tomorrow I would wake up, resume my routine, and all would feel normal again. But normal, I realized, was a lie I had been telling myself. Normal was waking up every morning feeling like I was living in a borrowed body. Normal was laughing at jokes I didn't find funny. Normal was making sacrifices that left my own dreams collecting dust. Normal was being invisible in the most important story, the story of my own life. It was during that night of restless reflection that I understood something crucial. The first step to freedom is awareness. You cannot change what you do not see. You cannot reclaim what you do not recognize as lost. I had been blind to my own captivity because it wasn't dramatic. There were no chains clanking, no bars of iron. My prison was made of words like should, must, and expectation. My jailers were invisible. The judgments of others, the need for approval, the fear of disappointing people who would never even notice. And yet, awareness alone was not enough. Knowing that I was trapped did not automatically set me free. I felt a surge of panic, a mix of anger and despair. How had I allowed myself to hand over my life piece by piece to everyone else? The realization was painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I understood that freedom isn't given, it's claimed. It isn't a gift, it's a fight. And every journey begins with a single, terrifying truth. You cannot make anyone else happy if you have abandoned your own heart. That night, I made a small, almost insignificant decision. I turned off my phone, stopped scrolling through the endless river of other people's curated lives, and sat in silence. For hours, I let my mind wander, untethered by obligations, untangled from expectations. I remembered the things I had loved as a child, drawing in my notebook for hours, reading stories that took me to other worlds, running through fields without thinking of where I was supposed to go next. I remembered the spark I once had, a spark I had smothered under under layers of responsibility and politeness. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't free yet, not by a long shot, but I could feel the first cracks in my invisible chains. I started noticing how much of my energy had been spent on pleasing people who didn't even ask to be pleased. I noticed the exhaustion in my body, the constant ache of carrying invisible weights. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to realize that I had a choice. I could continue living in the shadows of other people's expectations, or I could start claiming the life that had been mine all along. It was terrifying. The thought of saying no, of disappointing people, of stepping off the path I had been conditioned to follow, it made my chest tight. But the thought of continuing as I had been, of watching my own life slip through my fingers, was far more unbearable. The chains I had never seen were real, and they were crushing me. And in that moment, I decided that I would not live like that anymore. I didn't know exactly how to break free. I didn't know if I would fail, stumble, or be misunderstood. I didn't know what people would say or think, but I knew one thing: I would start small. A single no here, a quiet boundary there, a decision made for myself, not for someone else. Freedom, I realized, isn't a giant leap. It's a series of small, intentional acts. And every act, no matter how small, chips away at the chains. That was the night I began to wake up, not just to the world around me, but to myself. The chains I had never seen were no longer invisible. They were in front of me, fragile in the face of a will I was finally willing to cultivate. I didn't know the road ahead, but for the first time, I felt like I had chosen it. And that choice, as frightening as it was, felt like the first breath of freedom I had taken in years. Chapter 2. When should becomes your life. From a young age, I had learned to live in the shadows of should. You should study harder. You should get a stable job. You should be kind even when it hurts you. The word itself seemed harmless, even well-intentioned. But over the years, it had quietly invaded every corner of my life, shaping decisions, desires, and dreams that weren't truly mine. By the time I reached adulthood, should had become a silent dictator, a voice so deeply ingrained that I barely recognized my own thoughts anymore. I can still remember the mornings of my early 20s, standing in front of the mirror, forcing a smile while mentally running through the checklist of shoulds. I should be happy. I should be ambitious. I should have everything under control. Each should was like a drop of water hitting a stone, eroding my authenticity one small impact at a time. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, not from effort, but from performing a role that had been written by everyone else but me. It wasn't just the big things either. Should seeped into the little details of life. What I wore, what I ate, who I called, even who I allowed into my inner circle. I was so busy trying to align with everyone else's expectations that I lost track of what I wanted. If someone had asked me who I truly was, I wouldn't have known what to say. My identity had been replaced by a collection of obligations, compromises, and rehearsed pleasantries. I had become a person designed to fit into the lives of others rather than my own. The problem with should is that it disguises itself as love, concern, or wisdom. When my parents told me, you should follow this career path, it's safer, it sounded caring. When friends suggested, you should come to this event, it's what everyone expects, it sounded friendly. And when society whispered, you should look like this, act like that, achieve this by now, it sounded reasonable. But should is never neutral, it is coercive. It quietly steals your choices while pretending to guide you. And if you never question it, it becomes the air you breathe, invisible but controlling. I remember a particular evening when the weight of should became unbearable. I had agreed to attend a gathering I didn't want to attend because, according to everyone around me, I should be social. I arrived smiling, nodding, laughing on cue, all while my heart sank. Every minute felt like a betrayal of myself. By the time I got home, I was drained, and the realization hit me like a punch. I had spent my entire evening serving an idea of myself that was borrowed, fabricated, and lifeless. In that moment, I understood that should had stolen more than just my time. It had stolen my sense of presence, my ability to be fully alive in my own experiences. Breaking free from should isn't about rebellion. It's not about ignoring advice or being reckless. It's about recognizing the difference between external expectations and internal truth. It's about learning to pause, to ask, do I want this, or am I doing it because I feel obligated? That pause is deceptively powerful. It's a tiny spark that can ignite a revolution in your mind. The first time I practiced it, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and exhilaration. Guilt for defying what I had been taught to obey without question, and exhilaration because, for the first time in years, I was listening to myself. The road to freedom from should is not easy. Every step feels like walking against an invisible current. Family, friends, coworkers, even strangers will unconsciously reinforce the old patterns. Why don't you? You should. It's better if the voice of should is relentless because it has spent years entrenching itself in your habits and beliefs. But every time you pause, every time you make a conscious choice that aligns with your truth, you chip away at its power. Every no and every yes made from genuine desire rather than obligation is a victory. I began by examining the small, everyday shoulds. I questioned why I felt compelled to check my phone constantly, why I attended events that drained me, why I said yes when my body screamed no. Each question revealed a layer of unconscious obedience. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began reclaiming my time, my attention, and most importantly, my inner voice. I realized that the more I honored my own desires, even in small ways, the clearer my mind became. The fog of obligation lifted, and with it came a strange, exhilarating freedom I had almost forgotten existed. Of course, guilt was a constant companion. Every decision that prioritized my own desires over others' expectations was accompanied by a whisper of shame. But I learned something crucial. Guilt isn't always a signal of wrongdoing. Often, it's the voice of old conditioning trying to keep you bound to invisible chains. Recognizing that distinction became one of the most liberating lessons of my life. Guilt from breaking shoulds is temporary. The peace of living authentically lasts far longer. I also realized that breaking free from should doesn't mean abandoning relationships or responsibilities. It means participating in them consciously. It means choosing involvement, not out of fear or habit, but from genuine desire and alignment with your values. Suddenly, interactions that once felt obligatory became meaningful because I was present in them as myself, not as a shadow performing a script I didn't write. By the end of that year, my life had begun to shift in ways I never anticipated. I said no to commitments that drained me. I pursued passions that excited me, even when others didn't understand. I allowed myself to feel my own emotions, even when it was uncomfortable. Each choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized I had lost. And the most profound realization was this: the shoulds of the world will never disappear, but you can decide which ones deserve your energy and which ones deserve to be left behind. Living without should doesn't mean living without challenge. In fact, it often requires more courage than following the familiar path. But the reward is incomparable. A life that feels like yours, unfiltered and authentic. A life where your decisions, your dreams, and your presence belong to you alone. And once you experience even a glimpse of that freedom, there's no turning back. You understand at your core that the world will continue to offer endless shoulds, but now you have the power to choose, and in that choice lies your liberation. In Chapter 3, the fear of letting go. Fear has a strange way of disguising itself as logic, as responsibility, even as love. For years, I thought I was cautious, disciplined, and practical. But in truth, I was afraid to let go of the life I had built around other people's expectations, afraid to step into the unknown, afraid to confront the discomfort of being truly myself. Letting go is terrifying because it asks you to release the familiar, even when it is suffocating, and embrace the uncertain, even when it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. I remember one evening vividly, sitting in my car outside my old apartment. I had spent the entire day doing things I didn't want to do, living up to obligations I hadn't agreed to with my heart. And when I finally sat there alone, I realized how much of my life I had surrendered. Friends I hadn't chosen, routines I hadn't wanted, a career path that fit the mold but not my soul. And yet the thought of leaving it all terrified me. I imagined the judgment, the loneliness, the questions I would face. The fear of letting go was paralyzing. What I've come to understand is that fear is not the absence of courage, it is the companion of it. The more important the choice, the stronger the resistance. The thought of breaking free from obligations, expectations, and roles that no longer served me was so frightening that I hesitated for months. I clung to comfort, to routine, to people who made me feel obligated rather than alive. Every morning I told myself I would start tomorrow, and every night tomorrow never came. The fear manifests in subtle ways. It appears as doubt. What if I fail? It appears as guilt. What if I hurt them? It appears as hesitation. Maybe I should wait a little longer. It whispers that staying the same is safe safer, that safety is worth more than authenticity, that the consequences of letting go are unbearable. But the irony is that staying doesn't protect you, it slowly erodes your life. It keeps you trapped in a cage of your own making, a cage lined with excuses, obligations, and unspoken shoulds. I reached a breaking point one rainy afternoon. I had been carrying a burden of commitments I hadn't chosen, and every fiber of my being ached for release. I remember standing at the edge of the street, the rain soaking through my clothes, feeling a strange clarity. For the first time, I realized that fear is not a signal to stop. Fear is a sign that something important is at stake. The very thing you are afraid to let go of, the people's approval, the security, the familiar life, might be exactly what is holding you back from becoming yourself. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or compassion. It means choosing where you invest your energy. It means differentiating between duty that aligns with your values and duty that enslaves your spirit. For years, I had blurred that line, mistaking obligation for purpose. And every time I finally considered letting go, the fear shouted louder. But I learned to listen differently. I learned to distinguish between fear that protects and fear that confines. The first is rational, the second is a chain, and it is meant to be broken. The process of letting go begins internally. You start by acknowledging the fear, by naming it, by sitting with it instead of running from it. I remember lying on my bedroom floor, heart pounding, repeating quietly to myself, I am afraid, and it is okay. And in that act of acknowledgement, a small part of the fear lost its grip. Fear thrives in denial, in silence, in pretending everything is fine. But when you shine light on it, when you face it without judgment, you begin to see that it is not invincible. I also discovered that letting go is rarely instantaneous. It is a gradual process, a series of small, deliberate choices, saying no to one obligation, refusing one expectation, walking away from one habit that drains your energy. Each act, while frightening, becomes evidence of your courage. Each step proves that fear, while present, does not have to control you. Slowly, the cage begins to crack. Slowly, the horizon of possibility expands. I cannot overstate the power of small actions. The first time I declined an invitation I didn't want to accept, my chest tightened and my mind raced with what-ifs. Yet when I returned home, a sense of relief washed over me, like a weight I hadn't realized I carried had been lifted. It was a tiny act, almost imperceptible, but it signaled the start of a different life. And with every similar decision, fear became less of a dictator and more of a companion, a signal to move consciously, to honor my needs, rather than an excuse to stay imprisoned. Letting go also forces confrontation with the expectations of others. People who have grown accustomed to your compliance may resist your transformation. They may question you, judge you, or even attempt to pull you back. And here lies another source of fear. The fear of conflict, the fear of disapproval, the fear of being misunderstood. But freedom is rarely polite or convenient. It often requires walking away from comfort zones, breaking patterns, and choosing authenticity over acceptance. The ones who truly care for you will eventually respect your choices. The ones who don't are precisely the chains you need to release. I remember calling a long-time friend who had grown used to my constant yesies. I hesitated before saying, I can't take this on right now. My voice shook, my mind raced, but I spoke the truth. The response was not immediate understanding, but a subtle shift in our dynamic. It was awkward, tense, and uncomfortable, but it was honest. That honesty, though frightening, was liberating. And that is the essence of letting go. It is not an absence of fear, but a willingness to act despite it. By the time I fully understood it, I realized that the fear of letting go is a paradox. It is terrifying because it threatens the familiar, yet staying in the familiar is far more dangerous. Living a life dictated by others' expectations, weighed down by invisible chains, is a slow death of the spirit. Letting go may feel like stepping off a cliff, but often the fall is the first flight. You discover strength you didn't know you had, clarity you didn't know existed, and a life that feels unmistakably, beautifully yours. And so I began, one small act at a time. One conversation, one boundary, one choice. I did not leap blindly, but I walked steadily, mindful of fear, yet refusing to be imprisoned by it. And each step, though frightening, carried me closer to a truth I had been avoiding, that freedom, joy, and authenticity are always on the other side of letting go. Chapter 4. Discovering your inner compass. Freedom is meaningless without direction. Once I had begun to recognize the chains and face the fear, I realized something critical. Letting go of obligations and expectations is only the first step. Without a guiding principle, without a compass, letting go can feel like drifting aimlessly into a storm. That's when I learned the importance of discovering my inner compass, the quiet, unwavering voice within that knows what is true for me, even when the world shouts otherwise. I had spent so many years navigating life by external signals, approval, recognition, social cues, that I had forgotten to check in with myself. My thoughts, desires, and instincts were muffled beneath layers of should and obligation. For a long time, I mistook discomfort for danger, compliance for wisdom, and other people's satisfaction for my own fulfillment. I thought that if I did what everyone else expected, I would find happiness. I was wrong. The first step in discovering my inner compass was silence. It sounds simple, almost trivial, but it was anything but. Silence forces you to confront the noise in your mind, the chatter of doubt, fear, and old conditioning. I remember sitting in my living room one Sunday afternoon, no phone, no music, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. At first, the silence felt unbearable. My mind raced with excuses, worries, and regrets. But gradually, underneath all that noise, I began to hear something softer, steadier, a voice that had been drowned out for years. It wasn't loud or demanding, it was patient, clear, and unwavering. It was my inner compass. This inner voice doesn't tell you what to do in the language of commands or pressure. It speaks in feelings, nudges, and subtle clarities. When a choice aligns with your true self, it feels light, even if it is difficult. When a choice is misaligned, it feels heavy, constricting, and wrong in ways you can't always explain logically. I learned to pay attention to these sensations. I learned that my body, emotions, and intuition were not obstacles, they were indicators. They were the signals of a mind and heart finally waking up to themselves. Discovering your inner compass also requires letting go of comparison. For years, I had measured myself against others, their successes, their choices, their lives. I believed that the path they were on was somehow the standard I had to follow. But the truth is, each person's compass is unique. What feels right for me may be incomprehensible to someone else, and what feels wrong for me may be someone else's calling. Learning to honor my own compass meant turning down the volume on other people's lives and turning up the volume on my own. I began small. I asked myself simple questions. What do I enjoy, even in private? What excites me? What drains me? I began to observe my reactions to choices and situations, the way my body responded, the way my mind felt, the lingering emotions in my heart. Over time, patterns emerged. I realized that certain activities, relationships, and routines made me feel alive and grounded, while others left me drained, anxious, or empty. My inner compass was guiding me all along. I just needed to start listening. One of the most challenging lessons was learning to trust myself. For years, I had relied on external validation to confirm my choices. Without it, I felt insecure, inadequate, or even wrong. Trusting my inner compass required practicing courage, making decisions without seeking permission, without needing reassurance, without waiting for approval. The first time I did this consciously, it was terrifying. I chose to take a day off work to focus on a personal project, ignoring the internalized fear of judgment. And yet, that day became one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. I realized then that trusting myself was not reckless, it was radical self-respect. Another revelation came with recognizing that the inner compass is not static. It evolves as you evolve. What feels true for you today may not feel true next year, and that's okay. The key is to stay connected, to check in regularly, and to allow yourself the freedom to change course without guilt. I had spent so many years believing that consistency meant perfection, that any deviation was failure. In reality, the inner compass thrives in honesty and adaptability, not rigidity. I also discovered that the inner compass speaks most clearly when I honor my core values. These values, courage, authenticity, curiosity, kindness, became my North Star. Whenever I faced a decision, I asked, does this align with my values, or am I bending to fear or obligation? This simple check transformed the way I interacted with the world. It didn't remove challenges, conflicts, or hard choices, but it made them meaningful and navigable. My compass didn't eliminate fear, it gave me direction in the midst of it. One evening, after weeks of reflection, I noticed something profound. I no longer felt adrift. Even when uncertainty arose, even when fear whispered doubts, I felt anchored. My inner inner compass had become a companion, not a distant ideal. Decisions became easier, boundaries clearer, and priorities more aligned. I realized that freedom is not just about saying no to others, it's about saying yes to yourself. And to say yes authentically, you must first know who you are, what matters to you, and where you truly want to go. Discovering your inner compass is not a one-time event, it is a lifelong practice. It requires reflection, honesty, courage, and patience. It requires moments of discomfort and solitude. It requires letting go of the need to please, control, or predict everything. But in return, it offers something priceless: clarity, confidence, and a deep sense of alignment with your own life. For the first time, I began to feel that the choices I was making were not just acts of rebellion, they were acts of creation. I was creating a life that belonged to me. By trusting your inner compass, you reclaim ownership of your life. You stop drifting in currents set by others. You learn to navigate storms with integrity and grace. And most importantly, you rediscover the thrill of being fully alive in a world that often demands conformity. The compass doesn't erase challenges, fear, or mistakes, but it shows you the path that is authentically yours, and in doing so, it makes freedom not just a dream, but a lived reality. Chapter 5. The Loneliness of Truth. Truth has a strange companion: loneliness. The more I embraced my own path, the more I realized how few people were prepared to walk it with me. For years, I had been surrounded by familiar faces, supportive voices, and comforting routines. But when I started making choices aligned with my inner compass, saying no when it mattered, prioritizing my own values, and refusing to conform, the atmosphere shifted. Some relationships tightened, some faded, and some revealed cracks I hadn't noticed before. Truth demands honesty, and honesty often requires leaving behind the comfort of universal agreement. I remember a weekend when this hit me particularly hard. I had been invited to a gathering of friends I had known for over a decade. For years, our interactions had been seamless, predictable, and comforting. But that night, as I declined invitations that didn't resonate with me, my decisions met with subtle resistance, questioning, and even judgment. "Why don't you want to join us? We're just having fun, don't be difficult." I realized then that truth often comes with solitude, because people are accustomed to your compliance more than your authenticity. Loneliness is not just physical isolation, it's the quiet awareness that your mind and choices are no longer easily understood by those around you. It's the realization that many people you love and respect have been conditioned to expect a version of you that doesn't exist anymore, and that can feel painfully isolating. I sat alone in my apartment that night, the hum of the city outside contrasting sharply with the stillness inside. I felt the weight of my decisions, the absence of familiar approval, and the echo of my own voice asking, "Am I doing the right thing?" But loneliness is not inherently negative. In fact, it is a sign of progress. The discomfort that accompanies solitude is the space where authenticity grows. When you are no longer entangled in the expectations of others, you can finally hear yourself, feel yourself, and understand yourself in ways that were previously impossible. I learned to welcome the quiet, to sit with my own company, and to allow the emptiness to be a canvas for self-discovery rather than a void of rejection. One evening, I reflected on the nature of human connection. I realized that relationships often thrive on patterns of familiarity, not truth. People grow accustomed to roles: the dependable friend, the agreeable partner, the obedient child. When you step outside these roles, when you start living your own truth, it creates friction. Some relationships adjust, some dissolve, and some resist fiercely. And that resistance is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of the rigidity of expectations around you. Truth is heavy, and not everyone is ready to hold it with you. The loneliness of truth also taught me to differentiate between connection and comfort. In the past, I had equated being liked with being loved, compliance with harmony, and agreement with intimacy. But when I began listening to myself, I discovered that many of my closest interactions had been transactional. They existed because I fit into someone else's framework, not because we truly understood each other. Loneliness revealed the difference between companionship rooted in convenience and connection rooted in authenticity. Facing this solitude required courage. I learned to sit with discomfort without trying to escape it. I began journaling my thoughts, meditating on my emotions, and spending time in reflective walks through the city. Slowly, I realized realized that my fear of being alone was rooted in dependency, not in reality. My inner compass, my values, and my choices were my constant companions, steadfast and unwavering. I began to understand that being alone in truth is far better than being surrounded by affirmation built on falsehood. As I embraced this understanding, I noticed a shift in the quality of my relationships. Those who resonated with my authenticity gravitated closer. Conversations became deeper, lighter, and more meaningful. And those who could not accept my truth drifted away, not with malice, but naturally, like leaves carried off by the wind. In that way, loneliness became a filter, separating superficial attachments from genuine connections. It was painful at first, but ultimately liberating. I also discovered that truth requires consistency. The first time I wavered, tried to please someone despite my instincts, I felt an immediate heaviness. The body remembers falsehood, even when the mind rationalizes it. Living in alignment with your own compass requires vigilance, patience, and sometimes the uncomfortable willingness to be misunderstood. But the reward is profound, a life that feels cohesive, honest, and deeply your own. There were nights when the loneliness was acute, when the absence of familiar approval felt like a void threatening to swallow me whole. Yet over time, I noticed a paradoxical comfort emerging. In solitude, I discovered the richness of my own company, the strength of my convictions, and the depth of my emotional landscape. I could feel without judgment, think without interruption, and act without permission. Loneliness became less a punishment and more a sanctuary, a sacred space where the noise of the world receded and the clarity of my own life emerged. The lesson of the loneliness of truth is this: when you step into authenticity, not everyone will follow, not everyone will understand. And that is not a failure. It is the natural consequence of aligning with something larger than external approval. Your journey becomes selective, purposeful, and refined. You learn to value the few who resonate over the many who comply. You learn that true freedom often comes in the form of solitary alignment, and that solitude is not emptiness but a form of profound presence. By the end of that chapter of my life, I had learned to embrace the paradox. Truth is isolating, yes, but it is also clarifying. Loneliness is not a threat, it is a teacher. It strips away illusions, exposes the depth of your desires, and demands that you be fully, courageously yourself. And in that space, I began to realize a profound truth. Freedom is not measured by the number of people who walk beside you, but by the alignment of your steps with your own heart. Chapter 6, Breaking Free from Approval Addiction. Approval is addictive. I didn't realize it at first, but for most of my life I had been hooked. It wasn't drugs or alcohol, not in the traditional sense, but the effect was eerily similar. The rush of being liked, the comfort of agreement, the temporary high of validation, they became the metrics by which I measured my worth. Every nod of approval, every smile, every pat on the back was a hit, and I kept chasing it, even when it left me hollow inside. It's subtle at first. You don't notice that your decisions are driven more by others' expectations than your own desires. You say yes because it's easier than facing conflict. You suppress opinions because dissent is uncomfortable. You shape yourself to fit the mold you've been handed. Over time, it becomes a habit, an instinct. You don't just crave approval, you depend on it. And when it's withheld, you feel anxious, unworthy, even invisible. I remember the first moment I noticed it. I had just finished presenting an idea at work, and I found myself scanning everyone's faces looking for a reaction. Did they like it? Did they think it was good enough? I realized then that the content of my work mattered far less than the response it generated. My self-esteem was entirely external. I was a puppet, my strings pulled by applause, agreement, and recognition. The revelation was painful. I had been living in a cage built of everyone else's opinions, and the key to escape lay in confronting my own dependency. Breaking free from approval addiction begins with awareness. You need to notice the patterns in which you seek validation. When do you change your opinions to fit in? When do you smile through discomfort? When do you sacrifice your desires to prevent disapproval? I started journaling these moments, writing down instances when my actions were driven by fear of judgment rather than authenticity. Seeing the patterns on paper was shocking. I realized just how often I had surrendered my own voice. But awareness alone is not enough. The next step is conscious resistance. It is in these small, deliberate acts that liberation begins. The first time I refused to agree with a friend friend just to avoid conflict, my chest tightened. I felt a mix of guilt, fear, and exhilaration. And yet, as the conversation continued without catastrophe, I realized something critical. The world does not end when you stop performing. People may react, they may question you, they may distance themselves, but you survive stronger and more authentic than before. One of the most difficult lessons was learning that approval is fleeting. People's opinions shift with moods, circumstances, and personal biases. Relying on them for validation is like building a house on sand. It may stand temporarily, but eventually it will crumble. True confidence comes from within. It comes from aligning actions with values, from honoring your own voice, from recognizing that your worth is inherent, not contingent on applause. I also learned to redefine success in my own terms. For years, I equated success with recognition, praise from superiors, admiration from peers, acknowledgement from family. But the more I sought these forms of validation, the more hollow I felt. Over time, I realized that the quiet satisfaction of knowing I acted in integrity, made a decision true to myself, or pursued a goal that mattered to me, that was far more fulfilling than any external approval could ever be. This shift was subtle but transformative. Breaking free from approval addiction requires patience. Your mind will resist. Old habits of seeking validation are deeply ingrained. You may feel guilt, fear, and even shame as you start to prioritize yourself. But these feelings are signs of growth, not failure. They indicate that you are stepping out of the old patterns, challenging the internalized rules, and beginning to live according to your own compass. The discomfort is temporary. The freedom is lasting. Boundaries become essential in this process. I learned to say no without over-explaining, to protect my time and energy without apology, to prioritize my own needs even when others expected compliance. Each boundary was a small act of defiance, a statement of self-respect, and a reminder that my life is mine to govern. With each act, the craving for external approval weakened and the internal sense of worth grew stronger. Social media, I discovered, was a particularly insidious enabler of approval addiction. Every like, comment, and share became a metric of my value. I began taking breaks, limiting exposure, and redirecting focus inward. The first few days were uncomfortable. I felt a phantom withdrawal, scanning feeds unconsciously, searching for validation that wasn't coming. But slowly, I noticed a sense of relief, a clarity that came from no longer performing for an audience I didn't need. My self-esteem started to shift from being externally sourced to internally grounded. Breaking free also required forgiveness of myself for the years I had given away and of others for conditioning me to seek approval. I realized that much of this addiction was not inherently my fault. Society, culture, family, and peers all contribute to shaping a person who prioritizes validation over authenticity. Acknowledging this allowed me to release guilt, embrace self-compassion, and focus on the practical steps of reclaiming my autonomy. Perhaps the most profound change came in relationships. Once I no longer depended on approval, interactions transformed. Conversations became more honest, conflicts more manageable, and connections deeper. People responded to my authenticity rather than my performance. Some relationships shifted and some faded, but the ones that remained were real, unforced, and meaningful. The freedom from approval addiction doesn't isolate you. It filters your life so that the relationships that survive are the ones truly worth keeping. In the end, breaking free from approval addiction is an act of radical self-respect. It is a declaration that your life, choices, and worth belong to you alone. It requires awareness, courage, boundaries, patience, and self-compassion. But the reward is profound. A life lived not for applause, but for authenticity. A life guided by your own inner compass, not the shifting opinions of others. A life that is finally yours. Chapter 7: Reclaiming Your Time and Energy. Time is life. Energy is life. And yet, for years, I had given both away freely, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes deliberately, to people, obligations, and distractions that left me depleted. I realized only slowly that by constantly prioritizing others' needs and expectations, I had outsourced the very essence of my life. Each favor I said yes to, each commitment I made out of obligation, each hour spent chasing approval was a fragment of myself I would never get back. The realization hit like a cold wind. If I didn't reclaim my time and energy, I would spend my entire life living someone else's version of it. It begins subtly. You start your day with good intentions, thinking, I'll just help them with this one thing. You answer emails immediately, attend meetings that aren't necessary, and pick up calls even when exhausted. By evening, your mind is cluttered, your body is drained, and your soul feels hollow. And yet, you convince yourself it's okay because you are being responsible or helpful. But in truth, responsibility is not endless sacrifice, and help is not worth the erosion of your own vitality. I remember the tipping point vividly. It was a Friday evening, and I was sitting at my desk, staring at a stack of unfinished tasks. I was exhausted, frustrated, and resentful, but instead of taking a break, I opened my laptop to help a colleague with a project that wasn't mine. Halfway through, I realized I hadn't eaten, hadn't moved, hadn't even paused to breathe. I was running on autopilot, and it terrified me to think how much of my life I had been living like this. My body and mind screamed for attention, yet my habits ignored them. That night, I made a vow I would reclaim what had been lost. Reclaiming your time and energy starts with boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are statements of self-respect. I began by asking myself hard questions. What tasks truly matter to me? Which obligations align with my values? Who deserves my attention and who drains it without reciprocity? I realized that saying yes indiscriminately had become a default, a reflexive response to fear, guilt, or habit. Each no I practiced felt awkward at first, but over time it became liberating. Saying no is not selfish, it is essential for preserving your essence. Energy is even subtler than time. It is not measured in hours, but in vitality, focus, and enthusiasm. I discovered that certain people, environments, and routines were energy vampires. Conversations that left me drained, obligations that weighed me down, habits that wasted my focus. They all accumulated like invisible debt. To reclaim my energy, I had to audit my life as rigorously as I would a budget. I began cutting back on draining activities, limiting exposure to negativity, and investing in practices that replenished me: exercise, mindfulness, creative expression, and rest. One of the hardest lessons was learning to prioritize myself without guilt. For decades, I had believed that attending to my own needs first was selfish. But in truth, neglecting myself only diminished my capacity to contribute meaningfully to others. Reclaiming energy and time is not abandonment, it is preparation. It is filling your own cup so that when you give, it comes from abundance, not depletion. I learned that by honoring myself first, I could engage with the world more authentically, more generously, and more effectively. I also realized that reclaiming my time meant examining my commitments honestly. I made lists of obligations I could delegate, postpone, or eliminate entirely. I stopped overextending myself to prove loyalty, competence, or worth. I began structuring my day around priorities that aligned with my values, not external expectations. The effect was immediate. Clarity replaced overwhelm, focus replaced distraction, and energy replaced fatigue. For the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my life rather than being dragged along by it. Technology, I discovered, was both a tool and a trap. I had spent countless hours on social media, email, and notifications, often out of habit rather than necessity. I began limiting digital distractions, creating intentional time for communication, and setting boundaries for when I would be available. The difference was profound. Freed from constant interruption, my mind cleared, and I could focus on work, creativity, and reflection. Time reclaimed is not just minutes on a clock, it is mental space, emotional clarity, and renewed vitality. Reclaiming energy also involved nurturing my emotional state. I realized that unresolved conflicts, suppressed emotions, and unaddressed fears were silently draining me. I began to confront difficult feelings, speak hard truths, and release grudges. Emotional energy, I learned, is as precious as physical time. Protecting it means choosing environments, conversations, and practices that nourish your mind and heart. Over time, I noticed a transformation. I felt lighter, calmer, and more capable of navigating life with resilience and joy. Perhaps the most profound shift came in relationships. Once I reclaimed time and energy, I could see who added value to my life and who depleted it. I became selective, not in a judgmental way, but in a discerning way. The people who respected my boundaries, celebrated my authenticity, and nurtured mutual growth stayed close. The ones who demanded, drained or manipulated drifted away naturally. This process was painful at times, but it clarified my priorities and freed me from obligations that were never mine to begin with. Reclaiming your time and energy is not a one-time act, it is a continuous practice. Each day you make choices about where your attention goes, what you invest in, and how you protect yourself from depletion. It requires vigilance, courage, and self-compassion, but the reward is immense. A life lived intentionally, where your actions align with your values, your energy fuels what matters, and your time becomes a sacred resource rather than a commodity spent on everyone else's demands. By the end of that journey, I felt a profound sense of ownership over my life. I understood that freedom is not just about breaking chains or saying no. It is about filling the space that remains with purpose, passion, and alignment. Time and energy are the currencies of life, and when you reclaim them, you reclaim yourself. In that reclamation lies the foundation of living fully, authentically, and powerfully. Chapter 8. The courage to say no. Saying no is deceptively simple in theory but profoundly challenging in practice. For most of my life, I had equated saying no with failure, selfishness, or rejection. I was conditioned to please, to comply, to make others comfortable, even when it cost me my own peace. Every yes I gave was a compromise, every avoided no a surrender. And yet, the moment I began exploring my boundaries, I realized that the ability to say no is not only essential, it is revolutionary. I remember the first time I tried it consciously. A friend asked me to help with a project that I had no energy or interest for. My instinct was automatic compliance, the familiar path of acquiescence, but something inside me hesitated. I felt my inner compass nudging me. This is not yours to carry. Saying yes will deplete you. My chest tightened, my mind raced with excuses and fears, but I took a deep breath and said, I can't help with this right now. The response was not catastrophic. There was surprise, a hint of disappointment, but life didn't end. I survived, and in that act, I felt a spark of liberation. Courage, I realized, is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. The fear of disappointing, the fear of rejection, the fear of conflict, they are natural. But when you align your actions with your values rather than the expectations of others, fear loses its paralyzing power. Each no spoken authentically becomes an assertion of your freedom, a reclamation of your time, energy, and integrity. The challenge of saying no is amplified by guilt. I had internalized the belief that accommodating others was moral, virtuous, and loving. Saying no felt like betrayal. I worried about judgment, about being perceived as unkind, uncaring, or uncooperative. But over time, I noticed a crucial truth. Guilt often arises not from wrongdoing, but from breaking patterns of compliance. When your decisions are rooted in authenticity and respect, guilt fades. It is replaced by clarity, confidence, and a deep sense of alignment. Saying no is also a practice in self-respect. Boundaries are the bridges between your needs and the demands of the world. Without them, you risk being consumed by the expectations of others, losing sight of your priorities, and compromising your well-being. Learning to say no is not rejection of people. It is protection of your life. It is telling the world, I am here, I am whole, and my time and energy matter. I remember an instance with a colleague who was relentless in their requests. In the past, I would have said yes repeatedly, even when it meant working late into the night. But one day I paused. I thought about my energy, my commitments, and my values. When the request came, I calmly said, I won't be able to assist with this today. There was tension, a moment of disbelief, but nothing catastrophic. And the next day, I realized I felt lighter, freer, more in control. That single no reinforced my inner authority and showed me that my well-being could coexist with the needs of others. The courage to say no also reshapes relationships. People who respect your boundaries become allies, not obstacles. Conversations become more honest, interactions more genuine, and mutual respect grows. Conversely, those who react negatively reveal dynamics that may have been unbalanced or toxic. In this way, saying no is both a shield and a filter, protecting you while clarifying which relationships are aligned with your values. I learned to approach saying no with mindfulness and compassion. It isn't about bluntness or hostility, it is about clarity and honesty. A well-spoken no communicates respect for both parties, respect for yourself, and respect for the other person's reality. It is an acknowledgement that you cannot give what you do not possess, and that your presence is is most meaningful when it is wholehearted rather than coerced. Saying no also became a tool for reclaiming my time. For years, I had allowed trivial obligations, social pressures, and minor favors to consume my days. Each no, no matter how small, freed space for what truly mattered: creative pursuits, meaningful relationships, rest, and reflection. By prioritizing in this way, I discovered that life becomes not only more manageable, but also more vibrant. The world does not collapse when you decline, it transforms, leaving room for authenticity, purpose, and joy. There were moments when saying no was terrifying. Fear whispered, "They will hate you, they will judge you, you are being selfish." But over time, I noticed a pattern. The intensity of fear diminished with each authentic no. The more I practiced, the more confident I became. Saying no became less about defiance and more about alignment, a way to honor my values, energy, and life. Each no became a cornerstone of my personal freedom. Courage to say no is not cultivated in isolation. It grows through reflection, practice, and patience. You learn to trust your instincts, to observe your reactions, and to measure your commitments against your values. Each refusal becomes evidence that your life belongs to you and that you can navigate the world without surrendering your integrity. By the end of this process, I realized that saying no is not a single act, it is a lifestyle. It is a commitment to authenticity, a practice of self-respect, and a declaration of freedom. The world may resist, opinions may challenge you, and fear may linger, but the reward is immense: clarity, empowerment, and the profound satisfaction of living a life that is truly your own. Saying no is a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone in your life. It ensures that when you say yes, it is meaningful, wholehearted, and intentional. It transforms relationships, priorities, and energy. Most importantly, it allows you to reclaim the one thing that truly matters: your life lived on your own terms. Chapter 9: Living on your own terms. Living on your own terms is a radical act. It is the culmination of every choice you've made to reclaim your life. Rejecting shoulds, confronting fear, trusting your inner compass, embracing solitude, breaking free from approval addiction, and learning to say no. It is not a single decision, but a series of deliberate choices that align your actions with your values, desires, and authentic self. And yet, living on your own terms is not easy. It demands courage, persistence, and a willingness to confront the discomfort of defying expectations. For years, I had followed a path mapped by others: family, society, friends, culture. Every step I took was influenced by someone else's definition of success, happiness, or virtue. I achieved milestones that were applauded, accumulated possessions that impressed, and maintained relationships that were convenient. Yet, despite appearances, I was deeply unfulfilled. The life I was living looked like freedom from the outside, but inside I felt imprisoned. It took me a long time to admit that real freedom does not come from achievement or approval. It comes from alignment with your own truth. The first step in living on your own terms is clarity. You must know who you are, what you value, and what matters most. I began reflecting on my life with honesty I hadn't allowed myself before. What drained me? What energized me? Which relationships nourished my soul and which left it hollow? Which obligations were mine and which had been imposed upon me? This reflection was not comfortable. It required facing years of denial and self-deception, but it was necessary. Without clarity, freedom is aimless and fragile. I realized that living authentically often comes with resistance. People who have grown accustomed to your compliance may react with confusion, judgment, or even hostility. Friends, family, co-workers, they may struggle to accept the new version of you who acts from conviction rather than expectation. There were moments when I questioned my choices, doubted my judgment, and feared the consequences. But over time, I recognized that resistance is not a reason to revert. It is a signal that your life is shifting toward truth. Authenticity often requires discomfort, and that discomfort is proof of growth. One of the most transformative aspects of living on your own terms is the liberation it brings to your time and energy. Every choice becomes intentional. I no longer invested in tasks, relationships, or obligations that drain me without return. I focused on projects that inspired me, on people who resonated with my values, and on experiences that enriched my soul. Life became more vibrant, not because circumstances had changed, but because I had shifted my relationship to them. Freedom is not a gift from the outside. It is created from within. Living authentically also requires embracing imperfection. For years, I believed that to live freely, I had to have everything figured out, to make every choice perfectly, to avoid mistakes. But freedom is not about perfection. It is about honesty, courage, and presence. I began to accept that mistakes are part of the journey, that uncertainty is inevitable, and that authenticity thrives in imperfection. Each misstep became a lesson, each failure a stepping stone, and each moment of fear an opportunity to practice courage. I remember the first time I pursued a personal goal without seeking approval. I wanted to dedicate time to a creative project that had no practical value in the eyes of others. The fear of judgment was intense. My inner critic whispered doubts relentlessly. Yet I persisted. I allowed myself to write, to experiment, to fail, to create freely. And in that process, I felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Living on your own terms is not always about grand gestures. It is about reclaiming everyday choices for yourself. Boundaries remain central. To live authentically, you must protect your space, energy, and values consistently. This often means saying no, stepping away from draining situations, and choosing the company of those who respect your autonomy. Over time, these boundaries create an ecosystem in which your freedom can thrive. The more consistently you honor yourself, the easier it becomes to maintain alignment even in the face of external pressures. Another key aspect is resilience. Living on your own terms will not be universally welcomed. People may criticize, misunderstand, or even distance themselves. Life may present challenges that test your commitment, but each time I faced resistance, I reminded myself that authenticity is non-negotiable. It is better to experience temporary discomfort than to spend a lifetime living someone else's script. Resilience is built not by avoiding resistance, but by standing firm in your truth despite it. I discovered that living authentically changes how you engage with the world. Decisions become purposeful, relationships deepen, and moments of joy feel more profound. Life is no longer a series of obligations to navigate, but a canvas on which you paint your choices intentionally. I felt a sense of ownership over my days, a connection to my own desires, and a freedom that was exhilarating and humbling all at once. Ultimately, living on your own terms is a continuous practice, not a final destination. Each day brings new challenges, new expectations, and new opportunities to align or misalign with your values. But with clarity, courage, boundaries, and resilience, the path becomes navigable. The reward is immense, a life that feels genuine, purposeful, and wholly yours. Freedom is not granted. It is claimed step by step, choice by choice, moment by moment. By the end of this journey, I understood a profound truth. Life lived on your own terms is not always easy, but it is the only life worth living. It requires courage to face fear, honesty to confront truth, and commitment to honor yourself consistently. And when you live authentically, every step, every decision, every moment is infused with power, clarity, and profound satisfaction. You are no longer a passenger in your own life. You are the navigator, the architect, and the author. Chapter 10. The Freedom Mindset. Freedom is not a place, a moment, or a single decision. Freedom is a mindset, a lens through which you see your life, interpret your choices, and navigate the world. It is the culmination of every step you've taken to reclaim yourself, confronting fear, discovering your inner compass, embracing solitude, breaking free from approval addiction, reclaiming your time and energy, and living authentically. The freedom mindset is not about escaping responsibility or isolating yourself. It is about consciously choosing how you engage with life, with others, and with yourself. I learned early on that freedom is both exhilarating and frightening. It offers endless possibilities, yet demands accountability. It is the promise of living fully, yet the challenge of confronting your deepest truths. For years, I had mistaken compliance for safety and approval for security. But freedom does not reside in obedience. It resides in courage, clarity, and authenticity. The freedom mindset is the conscious refusal to live in autopilot, the willingness to steer your own life despite uncertainty, and the embrace of your own power to create your reality. The first principle of the freedom mindset is ownership. Every choice you make, every action you take is yours. No one else determines your worth, your purpose, or your path. I realized that blaming circumstances, people, or societal expectations only perpetuated the illusion of powerlessness. True freedom begins when you take full responsibility responsibility for your life not as a burden but as an opportunity. You become the architect of your days, the author of your story, and the navigator of your journey. The second principle is alignment. Freedom without alignment is chaos. It is wandering without direction, a ship adrift in turbulent seas. Alignment means living in accordance with your values, your desires, and your inner compass. It is making choices that resonate deeply with who you are, even when they are uncomfortable or unpopular. When your actions align with your authentic self, freedom becomes tangible, not theoretical. You feel it in your body, in your mind, in the quiet confidence that arises from integrity. The third principle is courage. Every step toward freedom requires confronting fear, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of failure, and fear of uncertainty. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to act despite it. I learned that fear is a natural companion on the path to freedom. It signals growth, not danger. The more you act in alignment with your values, the more fear transforms from a barrier into a guide, showing you where your boundaries lie and where your strength resides. The fourth principle is boundaries. Freedom does not mean being available to everyone at all times. It means protecting your energy, your time, and your values fiercely. Boundaries are not walls. They are guardrails that allow you to navigate life with intention. I discovered that every no spoken authentically reinforced my autonomy, and every boundary honored allowed me to engage with the world from a place of abundance rather than depletion. Freedom thrives when you cultivate space for your mind, heart, and spirit to flourish. The fifth principle is resilience. Life will test you. Freedom invites scrutiny, challenges expectations, and often provokes discomfort. But resilience, the capacity to recover, adapt, and persist, ensures that your freedom is sustainable. I learned that setbacks, misunderstandings, and external pressures do not diminish your autonomy unless you allow them to. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to strengthen your mindset, refine your choices, and deepen your connection to yourself. Living with a freedom mindset transforms the ordinary into extraordinary. Choices are made consciously, not reflexively. Relationships are nurtured intentionally, not out of habit. Time and energy are invested purposefully, not squandered on distraction or obligation. The mind becomes a tool rather than a cage, and the heart becomes a compass rather than a hostage. Freedom is not granted, it is claimed, step by step, decision by decision, day by day. I noticed profound changes in my life as I embraced this mindset. Work became purposeful, relationships became authentic, and moments of joy became richer and more vivid. I felt present in a way I never had before, capable of making choices that reflected my true self. The fear that once dominated my decisions became a guide rather than a jailer. I began to see that freedom is not a destination. It is the way you live every single moment, consciously, courageously, and intentionally. The freedom mindset also brings profound peace. I no longer chased approval, clung to obligation, or feared judgment. My life is no longer dictated by external expectations. I have become my own measure of success, my own source of validation, and my own guide through uncertainty. This does not mean life is effortless or perfect. It means life is mine to navigate fully and authentically. There is an unparalleled serenity in knowing that your choices reflect your values and your truth. Freedom is contagious. The more I embraced this mindset, the more it influenced my interactions, decisions, and environment. People drawn to authenticity, integrity, and purpose gravitated naturally into my life. Toxic patterns faded, and meaningful connections deepened. The freedom mindset does not isolate, it filters and enriches, creating a life in which both solitude and connection are fulfilling. Finally, the freedom mindset is a lifelong practice. It requires vigilance, reflection, courage, and adaptability. It demands daily choices that honor your values, protect your energy, and align with your true self. It asks you to confront fear, embrace uncertainty, and persist through discomfort. But the reward is immeasurable, a life lived fully on your own terms with clarity, power, and joy. Freedom is not a gift you wait for, it is the life you build with intention, step by step, choice by choice. As I look back on the journey, from fear to authenticity, from approval addiction to self-respect, from constraint to liberation, I realize that freedom is not something external. It is a mindset cultivated through deliberate, consistent, and courageous choices. And once you claim it, you carry it everywhere, into your decisions, your relationships, your work, and your moments of stillness. It is a light that guides you through uncertainty, a compass that never fails, and a life that is unmistakably, beautifully yours. Freedom is not easy. It is not always comfortable, but it is worth every moment of fear, every act of courage, and every step into the unknown. It is the life you were meant to live, not for anyone else, but for yourself. And once you embrace the freedom mindset, there is no turning back. You are no longer living for others. You are alive, fully and unapologetically on your own terms.